As we always do here, we like to go through some of what's happening in the news and get that alternative view. Oh, David, go ahead. Sorry.
Just to backtrack slightly.
Yeah.
Just think in terms of the viewers and the listeners. With this, just to confirm, the issue with the child being attacked, so this is a non-existent child, we're saying?
No. There was an incident.
Yep.
But my sister had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, just clearing that up to my head. So,
so there was an incident.
Yep.
I'm speaking for you.
Yeah, I was bitten. I'd set up an activity, and that particular child was in my group because his behaviour was so unpredictable that the TAs didn't want to work with him, so he was at my table. And the activity included a red squeezy ball, and he kept picking it up and, playing with it. And I didn't know whether at any stage he would throw it across the table and injuring another child. So I rolled it off the table while I was talking, and he got up and held my hand and bit it, drawing blood. And I jumped. What I found that, when they cooked up this silliness here, that they edited out the footage where I was bitten, and when I jumped, and they just froze that. So they edited out all the rest of it.
So, and I don't know if I've actually said, but Kay, we'll get to it in a bit. But Kay's actually gone to court, fought this whole thing, and as much as it went into the newspapers, with as much detail as they just gave, no one's gone back to talk about them cooking the footage. No one's gone back to say that she's been fully exonerated. No one's gone back to say that this is absolute madness. No one's come back with any money to say, well, okay, sorry for holding up your school and destroying the work that you did up to a point, so let us repair the damage. No, it's just absolutely moved on. Yes,
just to jump in very quickly, this is the importance of one of the areas of the think tank, which is the media, because we need our own news gathering agency, which is first and foremost, and then to collate all of the African owned outlets, because as you have that videotape and all that information, you see, where we're in a reactionary position, even if we speak with European press, we're merely reacting to what the ground that they've set. And it's like saying, it's like Ugandans talking about Constantine and saying there's no white Jesus, he created it, and that it's an oxymoron. You cannot prove something that didn't happen. So when you have the evidence and you've got the organisational skills from your own news gathering agency to African-owned press, you counter their stories, and then you represent us in a human light. So all of these institutions are very necessary. And what we start to see is that there's an ecosystem that needs to be had. And not to hold up the mic, but one thing that you said that was very interesting is that you didn't have that interdependent relationship with the business community. The whole point of the ecosystem is that you have a chambers of commerce, which is economically underpinning the community.
But please,
go ahead.
They said you didn't have that, but you did actually have that.
That's right. That's right.
They actually said that, but the school was set up with those links in place.
Yeah, we'd already had.
But you see, sometimes the funding, our money, which I'll go into further in the show, is out there. There is capital that we have, which is so vast, which is not virtual, that we're going to take back next year in April, that will finance all of this.
All right, hold on, save that. We'll be coming back to that. I'll make a note and I will come back to that with you. As I was saying, but I mean, it's an organic show, so we go where we go. But today happens to be is it the 68th or 69th?
Well, it's not today. Wednesday gone was, so it's this week.
Okay.
It was the 69th anniversary of the birth of Fred Hampton, who was the leader of the Illinois Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party.
And I just wanted, because sometimes we generally start, but because we had you two, I really wanted you to just lay out the beginning so people knew what they was coming to. We generally start with something of the news and what's happening for the week. But that's just something I felt we couldn't really ignore. And if we have our own channel, if we have our own show, then our heroes must be respected and they must be honoured. And Fred Hampton, that's a very young man that was doing big things, and I just wanted to share, or for you, Trevor, to share some of the information around it.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think it was interesting for me just before I go into this to look into this stuff, because the only time I'd ever heard his name actually was in a Jay-Z song a couple of years ago. So to actually read his story, and a lot of the time we're not really aware of the great people that have come before us. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes we don't know these kind of stories. So basically, Fred Hampton, he was obviously a Black Panther, and I just list some of his key achievements. Basically, he he, as a teenager and into his early 20s, he established a truce basically between the Chicago gangs. He also helped establish the free breakfast program. So the Black Panthers had this program where they would feed children from all kind of backgrounds. I think they were feeding 10,000 children a day before they went to school across the country. And in Chicago, he set up 5 kitchens. I was just in West Side Chicago. He also established a free medical center, and again in Chicago had a door-to-door program of health services where they would offer testing for sickle cell and things like that. When you listen to people who knew him speak, they always talk about his ability to communicate with people from all walks of life, regardless of backgrounds, class, whatever. He had an ability to bring people together. And so he built links with the Latino community out there, with poor white organizations and groups out there in Chicago. And he's actually the original creator of the Rainbow Coalition. You know, Jesse Jackson talked about that afterwards, but it actually originated from him. But ultimately, what he was doing was seen as a threat. And so he was only 21 years of age when he was actually assassinated. Literally, they fired 90 shots into his apartment. He was in bed with his fiance, his fiance, 8.5 months pregnant. They fired 90 shots in there with rifles, shotguns, as the story unraveled, it turned out that there were people who were placed in his organization, his bodyguard, who actually gave the plans of the apartment to the FBI and to the police and all sorts. COINTELPRO.
The Black Panthers were they received the brunt of that COINTELPRO situation that was with them.
And that's the thing, it was he didn't believe in violence. His whole thing was the way to combat racism was through solidarity. Let's just build together. But he was still seen as a threat.
And I think it's so good that that's the person we're talking about today in terms of our whole subject and where we're going, because he's 21 years old when he was assassinated. But then think this through, how many of us are being prepared at 21 years old to take that level of responsibility?
Absolutely.
Even understand your connection and your responsibility to your community at that age. We're now growing young people that we think aren't supposed to have any real community responsibility, just have fun, drink, party, do whatever, and that's what it is. I'm young. When do you pick this up? At what point? Alright, well that's one of the things. I'm glad we dealt with that. We'll get into some of the other bits later, but Huston. No, we didn't really speak about it too much last week. We've got the floods and stuff. I mean, if I'm honest, I did not focus a lot on it this week. I know there was some upset in terms of the way President Trump handled it, but to be honest, President Trump could,
sequel to Bush.
Whatever happens, everyone's always going to be upset because that's his MO. His MO is going to always rile people up. But I know that it's been, I think the bit that sort of touched me, the only piece I saw that I wasn't sure about, I don't know if any of you saw, but I saw something on Facebook that said black people were asking for black folks with boats to stop because they're not picking us up. Did anyone see any of that stuff?
No, I didn't see that. I did see something about the evacuations and stuff, and they were telling people basically that if they didn't get out, there would be no rescue. Basically, there's no chance of rescue. You need to evacuate. You need to get out. And if you're not going to make it, then literally take a permanent marker, write your social security number on your arm so you can be identified. But no one is coming for you. Get out now or else. Wow. That was it.
Okay. And I think even Dean, and this is probably part of your remit, I guess, but when we're talking about disasters and natural disasters, and we're always going to be last. Our community is not going to be first. And if we fight for a certain level of education, then we also have to be prepared for how do we look after ourselves in the advent of a natural disaster or any kind of difficulty. We saw with Grenfell the other day.
Absolutely.
There are systems in place, but when it's attached to us, they seem to work differently.
We've got to stop talking about them. Do you know the greatest revolution we can have is to extrapolate Europeans from our central consciousness.
Mindset.
The minute we extrapolate Europeans from our central consciousness, we stop looking for Jesus to save us. It's funny, I actually saw this. I took my son to the portrait gallery, And it was the first time I had this epiphany. And there were some Italians around the portraits of Jesus, many, many of them. They were so excited. And I saw it. I said, wow, I thought they were actually celebrating Jesus. They're not. They're celebrating themselves. And they have sold it to us. And we have purchased it wholesale. Wow. So we cannot get past, and we keep asking. So I'm not a marcher, but I went down as an observational exercise to the reparations march because I wanted to hear the rhetoric and I wanted to hear what was coming out of it.
This is the march from Brixton to
Absolutely. So I caught them at Kenneton. I left my shop and I caught them at Kenneton. I lived in Kenneton, Ethelred Estate, for 7 years when I was a young man. And I walked with them to Parliament Square. And I said, it's all based on begging and expectation. So you give them these pieces of paper with names that they wipe their backsides with and have no respect for, that you have no tangible outcomes from, when you have a form of reparation that I'll go into later. But the whole point being is that we are our saviours. All these legislation exist. If you go into Hampstead and you see an ambulance service that serves the descendants of Eastern European Khazarian Empire, know that you can duplicate it. If you see that in Hackney, be aware that you can duplicate it. All of these things, and the security service. Now, it's funny that in the solution room, I actually release a question every day. And I released one about duplicating a corporation like G4S. I actually had the question on Saturday morning about the charities, that we have to stop relying on European charities and donate to our own well-established charities, because of what happened with Grenfell when they collected 22 million and donated 2 million to the people and sought to siphon the 20.
Sought to.
Well, because of now the lawyers of the ground work that people, amazing individuals with think tanks as well, like Vivar Moon, who are on the ground, and Toyin Agbe, who are on the ground to intercept these monies and the levels of fraud that would take place. But in absence of people like this, it'll go down like chicken. And it does every day.
All right, now. All right, well, look, I want to get into the educational thing now. We've got 20 minutes before the break, so I want to start with the educational thing. And my main question for today: does the education system prepare our children for a successful future in the various areas of their life that they would have to face?